Zalor inhaled deeply as he worked his arms through fluid, well-rehearsed movements, connecting his ki to the astral plane. While his companions were pleasant enough for residents of the prime material, the best he had met, in fact, he had grown weary of their incessant chatterings. To distract himself, Zalor had decided to begin his evening meditations early. The cranking of tightening gears, the breakneck cadence of the gnome speech, the seemingly never-ending tuning of a singular lute string, all faded into the background as his mind centered itself within his body. Zalo! The Gith could feel a vein bulge on the side of his head. A talented troubadour though she was, Zalor could not help but be annoyed by just about everything that came out of Perra's mouth when she wasn't singing. He silently maintained his pose. His hands were firmly connected to the ground while his feet were perfectly poised in the air, still as a statue, completely in control, just as the Zerths had taught him. What rhymes with Gith Sarai? Zalor opened his eyes, his serene expression breaking into a scowl. How about piss off and die? Oh, that's brilliant! The Dragonborn sang, hastily scratching away at a piece of parchment. The Gith sighed. With one motion, he flipped himself into the air, landed on his left foot, then swept his right upwards in a rising kick. A dull clunk sounded as his blow was intercepted. The corners of Zalor's mouth curled upwards, ever so slightly. It's good to know that someone around here is actually serious. Nobody's sneaking up on you tonight. Alice smiled, releasing the Gith's foot from her gauntleted hand. Oh, come now, Zalor. We both know that a real kick would have shattered my forearm quite handily. Zalor laughed softly in agreement as he stood on both feet again. At any rate, it seems this lonesome station will serve as our refuge from the desert for the night. The paladin turned to the tan-skinned human who was brushing the draft horses. Mr. Hattie, would you mind checking in with the owner? The man nodded, his dark curls swaying slightly in the warm breeze as he turned and began walking towards a modest stone and mortar building they had parked their wagon near. Perra let out a longing sigh. I swear, coming to Kalimshan was a curse. Alice raised an eyebrow. How do you mean? Is the sand getting between your scales again? There are just so many beautiful men here, and I simply don't have the time to properly appreciate them. Oh, gods, Zalor said, rolling his eyes. Maybe a nice pasha will hire me on to sing him to sleep each night. Then he'll fall desperately in love with me, and we'll live happily ever after. I'm all set up here, Naz called from the top of the wagon. The terrain around us is pretty open, so Bolter should have a clear shot at anything we don't want coming too close. Must you insist on giving names to all of your toys? Zalor huffed. Naz gasped in feigned horror. Would you let your own child go through life without one? The gnome chortled as he hopped from the wagon to the hard, dusty ground, brushing grit and sand from his pants. Come on, Zalor. Don't you know how to have any fun? The Gith stared back with a frown, his unblinking expression giving Naz his answer. Anyway, does anyone else think it's strange that the doors on the back of the wagon have 4 different locks, and we were given a total of 0 keys to any of them? Mr. Maliki Memnon did say we were being paid for discretion, Perra mused, running a claw across her scaly chin. Apparently whatever's in there is worth a tidy sum to some merchant in Kalimport. Something caught the corner of Zalor's eye. He turned his gaze towards the station, just as a bird was flying from a window towards the desert. I don't know. Something about this job feels off. At any rate, Alice interjected, we would do well to keep extra vigilant during tonight's watch. Now let's see to getting these horses to the stable. The poor things have been slaving away all day in the hot sun and deserve a proper rest. As the sun began to sag low towards the horizon, the Shields of Marigold had started to settle around their small fire for a much-needed meal. Hattie, the wagon driver, stood over Naz's patented collapsible self-stirring stew pot, adding some spices from a side pouch to the soup he was preparing. The station operator, a weathered man with a graying beard, who had introduced himself as Samir-in Daoud, walked out to join them. He apologized for the lack of accommodations, apologetically offering them a small basket of freshly baked flatbread.
The Githyanki really have the denizens of this plain all wrong, thought Zalor. For every tentacle-sucking asshole, there are at least 10 good and decent folk.
Suddenly, the Gith's ears twitched. He deftly reached out a hand, catching an arrow inches away from hitting his neck. A second arrow whizzed past him, embedding itself into Samir's throat. The old man sputtered as blood began pouring from his mouth. He stumbled forward and fell to the ground. "Behind the wagon! Move!" Alice commanded, raising her shield. The adventurers and driver scrambled and dove their way to relative safety as more arrows and bolts sailed past them. Short, dull thuds could be heard as more missiles slammed into the wagon's wooden side.
An ambush! Kchith!
Zalor spat.
How long do you think we've been followed?
Alice asked Hattie as the thuds of metal into wood became more frequent.
The Callum Desert is rife with gangs of bandits. We very well might have just been at the wrong place during the wrong time, the driver replied, nervously.
Naz, can you climb up and give us an idea of how many are out there? Alice asked, placing her sallet securely on her head.
Got it,
the gnome replied, as Perra lifted him upwards.
You stay here where it's safe, human,
Zalor barked, as he settled into a defensive stance.
They won't make it through me.
Looks like we have about 8 riders on horseback, heading right for us,
Naz called to his companions. The twang of a metal bowstring sang out as the gnome's contraption hurled a bolt of blue energy.
Make that 7.
Zalor peeked around the left side of the wagon to see for himself, while Alice and Perra did the same around the right. As the gnome had said, 7 riders were quickly making their way towards the station. Long green scarfs billowed from their necks and waists as their horses kicked up clouds of sand and dust. One was aiming their bow directly at Zalor. Seeing his opportunity, the Gith stepped out from behind the wagon. He launched himself forward as an arrow flew towards him. Zalor snatched it from the air, whirled himself around, then sent the arrow straight back at its sender. Streaks of crimson splattered across the rider's scarf as he was knocked from his horse.
6,
the Gith called out. Another raider grunted as his chest was impaled by a javelin. He slumped over as his horse turned and bolted to its left. 5, Alice yelled. Suddenly, a chorus of shouts rose up from behind the approaching horsemen. It was as if the desert sand dunes themselves were cheering them forward. In an instant, an assortment of humans, half-elves, and humanoids with red skin and hair like dancing flames appeared seemingly out of nowhere as they tossed off the sand-colored cloaks that were concealing their positions. They sprinted towards the wagon, waving swords and clubs. "Perfect timing! I've been needing an audience ever since that business at the Oasis. Look away or close your eyes, loves," Perra sang to her companions. Zalor did as he was told, and turned his eyes towards the wagon, knowing full well that the Dragonborn was dangerously more adept in her magic than she was in the realm of common sense. The lullaby-like melodies that floated from Perra's lute mixed with her sonorous singing to create a warped, hollow-sounding, and hauntingly beautiful tune. After a moment, Zalor looked back towards the assailants. The riders were almost upon them, but the crowd of 20 or so footmen were standing in a daze, some shifting their weight back and forth, as if dancing slowly to Perra's music. The Gith shifted his attention as a blue bolt of energy slammed into another rider, her flaming hair billowing as she was launched backwards.
4!
Naz called out. Zalor quickened his stride as he ran towards a pair of oncoming riders.
Forgive me, great Menyar Og, as I apply your teachings against such weak and pathetic opponents.
The Gith leapt into the air as the assailants tried to slice at him with their blades. Zalor delivered a kick to the chest of each rider, knocking both of them from their horses. One hit the ground hard, head first, clearly dead. The other rolled a few times before shakily getting to his feet, raising his curved sword. Zalo responded with a palm strike to the center of his forehead. The rider's knees buckled under him as he slowly crumpled to the ground.
2,
he yelled. Zalor heard the clang of metal on metal. He turned to see Alice blocking a sword blow with her shield as a mounted bandit attempted to ride past her. Zalor watched as she used the back of her warhammer to hook the rider's boot and pull them off their horse. The paladin then quickly flipped the hammer around and smashed its blunt end into the downed rider's head. 1! she shouted.
Enough!
The remaining rider barked. With one hand, he threw back his cloak, revealing the gleaming black studded leather he was wearing and the ornate pommel and jeweled scabbard of the scimitar at his side. With the other, he drew an ornate flintlock, its polished brass barrel reflecting the light from the setting sun. Zalor watched as he raised it in the direction of the wagon. There was a flash of powder as the firearm thundered.
Ow! What the hells? You shot me!
Perra cried. She clamped a hand over the hole in her arm, trying to slow the blood pouring from the fresh wound.
Oh, come now. You cast some sort of enchantment over my men.
The rider dismounted his horse and began walking towards the wagon.
You would have done the same thing in my position.
As the man approached, Zalor could more clearly see that he, too, had flame-red skin and hair that danced like a cooking fire. His eyes were like black coals set into his head, made all the more unsettling by the devilish smile that was spreading across the man's face.
How could you just assume that? I don't even know you.
Perra winced as Naz clamped a device on her arm. Pincer-like appendages began to whir and click as they delicately probed the wound.
Don't know me. Do you hear that, my friends? This woman says she's never heard of us.
The bandits behind him laughed and jeered, clearly free now of the effects of Perra's spell.
Well then, order demands I inform you that you are in the presence of Umzaya in Kalim, the desert flame, scourge of the sands.
He drew his sword with a flourish, flashing a roguish smile at the adventurers.
You should count yourself lucky. Lesser men have soiled themselves at the mere mention of my name. Me and my band have picked countless caravans clean of their pesky valuables, and it seems your particular wagon gets to be next in line. A little bird told me that you four are guarding something worth quite a pretty pile of coin.
Zalor glanced back at his companions. He saw Naz's device carefully pull a small, bloody metal ball from Perra's arm. Alice placed her hands on the wound and began chanting in prayer.
Sir, Desert Flame, I can see you have us quite outnumbered, the Gith said slowly.
Clearly,
Zaire said, with a low chuckle.
Surely a man with such a fearsome reputation wouldn't be above engaging in a more honorable fight?
The bandit raised a coal-black eyebrow.
What are you suggesting, my strange green friend?
Single combat. You and I, man to man. If you emerge victorious, the wagon and its contents are yours without any more fight from us. If I win, you leave us alone.
Zaire slapped his thigh as a deep, bellowing laugh left his lips.
Even now, facing certain death,
he said, pointing a gloved finger towards the Gith.
You want to honor me with the test of my strength, separate from that of my men. I knew I liked you. I accept your challenge.
Zaire bowed slightly in the Gith's direction. Zalor fought to keep his expression neutral as he returned the bow.
This idiot has no idea what he's up against,
he thought, as he stepped forward and assumed a defensive stance. Zalor's nostrils flared ever so slightly as the bandit raised his flintlock, aiming it, this time, at the Gith.
I would advise against that course of action. Your blade will suffice.
Zaire laughed softly. My friend, I can see clearly that you are unarmed, which means you have some tricks up your sleeves that I am, as of yet, unaware of. You must forgive me for using a tool that you have already seen in action.
There was another flash of powder as the bandit pulled the trigger. Zalor focused his mind around the lead ball hurtling towards him. He raised his right hand, channeling the projectile's momentum into his palm. With a flick of his wrist, he redirected the ball back towards Zaire. The bandit groaned in pain as the bullet found its new target, his left forearm. His flintlock clattered to the ground.
Doesn't feel so nice, does it, asshole?
Perra called.
Take that thing, Zalor, and shoot him again!
The Gith only had a moment to savor his maneuver before the bandit was upon him, his sword dancing through the air like shadows around a flame. Zalor planted himself firmly upon his back foot as blood began trickling from slices on each of his shoulders.
There are no blades faster than mine in the wastes, Zaire panted. A lesser man would have been carved to bits. You have my respect. If you give up now, I might consider letting you become one of my men.
Zalor responded only with silence, his gaze locked with the bandit's.
A pity. You seemed like you could show such promise.
You know nothing of potential,
Zalor spat. His mind and body connected to the astral plane, Zalor manifested a pair of spectral arms from his shoulders. The Gith exhaled, launching at the bandit captain with a flurry of fists. He could feel bones crack and organs rupture as his blows connected. Zalor returned to his stance, recentering himself with a sharp inhale.
Kya!
Zaire's sword clanked as it hit the ground. He coughed, sending a spatter of blood across the sand. He fell backwards, laying unmoving on the ground as his eyes stared upwards, locked in an unseeing stare. Zalor looked towards the group of bandits staring in dumbfounded silence.
Who's next?
He snarled. In a cloud of dust and shouts, the rest of the goons ran off into the desert.
Some scourge of the sands he turned out to be,
Perra remarked, rubbing her now healed bicep. A look of inspiration crossed her face as she broke out in a grin.
You could say he's just an old flame now, the Dragonborn said,
playfully elbowing Alice's side. The paladin smacked an armored palm into her visor. Zalor groaned audibly, relaxing his stance.
Thank Garl, that's all over,
Naz sighed.
Hey, where's Hattie?
The sound of a loud metal click caught the adventurers' attention. They ran to the back of the wagon. Waiting for them was their driver, one hand on the now unlocked door, and the other pointing a cracked wand in their direction.
Easy now, my friends. This isn't how this was supposed to go.
Sparks flew from the wand's cracks in random spurts as Hattie waved it at them threateningly.
Just let me take the goods and I'll be on my way. Just tell the buyer you were robbed. It happens all the time out here.
Guys, that's a wand of fireballs, and it is definitely not in a safe state to use,
Naz whispered. Hattie pointed the wand at Zalor.
You! Open the door! I don't want to be blown to bits if there are wards on there.
The Gith kept his eyes on their betrayer as he opened the back of the wagon. He glanced inside, then did a double take.
What the? Is that it?
The inside of the wagon was completely empty, save for an ordinary-looking wooden chair.
What's wrong?
Hattie said, pushing his way past Zalor.
What the hell is this?
Zalor's companions peered over his shoulder to see for themselves.
Seems we're all the victims of some kind of prank,
Alice sighed, shaking her head.
We'll see how funny their little joke is once its punchline is smashed to kindling,
Hattie said, stomping his foot into the chair. Instead of the sound of splintering wood, Zalor heard a dull thud, like the sound of a rod against a stubborn animal. A purple eye opened on the top of the chair, followed by several others. Hattie tried to draw back his foot. A look of horror spread across his face as it remained stuck in place, as if glued to the chair. Black tendrils began reaching out from the chair's back. The seat morphed into a fanged maw, which chomped into Hattie's leg. As quickly as he could, Zalor slammed the door shut and refastened the locks. The wagon began rocking back and forth as muffled screams and monstrous snarls could be heard within. The adventurers stood in silence for a moment. Zalor, slightly frustrated, felt the vein on the side of his head bulge again. He sighed, then chuckled a bit at the absurdity of the situation.
Perra? What rhymes with gimmick?
Thanks for joining us on Browsing the Bestiary. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes and check out our Patreon at Browsing the Bestiary, all one word. We've also added a link tree to our Patreon, so now you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
On Patreon, you can keep up to date on any new pod-related announcements, access reference pages for each episode, and download character sheets for characters featured in our story times. You can also comment on what you think the next monster will be, and if you get it right, you'll get inspiration.
And if you're something of a lore master yourself, you can offer us corrections for any facts we got wrong. If you catch something we missed, you may get a shout out in a future episode.
Remember to cite your sources.
And before we go, we'd like to shout out our patrons. Thank you to Carl, Holly, Megan, and Kethri for becoming members. I'm Dungeon Mistress Jade.
And I'm Lore Master Andy.
May your dice rolls be high.
And your adventurers ever prepared.